Chair of the Federal Reserve Jerome Powell is pushing back against the Republican talking point that inflation is being caused by irresponsible Democratic spending. And I want to walk through a New York Times piece here that outlines Jerome Powell's statements on this, but it's something we've talked about extensively. It's such a dishonest talking point from Republicans, and you have to include in the conversation the massive amounts of spending that were done when Trump was still president, which should have happened, but they never seem to recognize that. And the massive supply chain problems we've seen. You can't just flick on and off the light switch to a global economy and not deal with lasting issues after that take a while to resolve themselves. And price gouging from corporations, we'll look at that chart we looked at during the Elizabeth Warren segment in the past once again in a little bit. Corporate price gouging, massive corporate profits is making a huge difference, unprecedented corporate profits in many cases, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine that impacted the oil and gas industry. So with that being said, here from the New York Times, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has repeatedly undercut a central claim Republicans make as they seek sharp cuts in federal spending. Government spending is driving the nation's still hot inflation rate. We'll skip down here. Asked whether federal tax and spending policies were contributing to price growth, Mr. Powell pointed to a decline in federal spending from the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, "You have to look at the fiscal impulse from spending," Mr. Powell said on Wednesday, referring to a measure of how much tax and spending policies are adding or subtracting to economic growth. Fiscal impulse is actually not what's driving inflation right now. It was the beginning, perhaps, but that's not the story right now. Instead, Mr. Powell, along with Mr. Biden and his advisors, says rapid price growth is primarily being driven by factors like snarled supply chains, an oil shock following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and a shift among American consumers from spending money on services like travel and dining out to goods like furniture. Mr. Powell has also said the low unemployment rate was playing a role. Quote, "Some part of the high inflation that we're experiencing is very likely related to an extremely tight labor market," he told a House committee earlier this month. And hopefully the identifying by Powell of the tight labor market being one of the factors involved in the inflation won't cause him, as is a concern, to overreact, go too far, and drive up unemployment and cause pain in that way, trying to respond to pain being caused by inflation, something we have mentioned in the past. And then I want to remind you, before discussing further, of this chart here that we looked at from the Economic Policy Institute, an analysis of the 2020-2021 inflationary period and how significant corporate profits were in that equation. 53.9% based on this analysis of inflation was being driven by corporate profits. That's compared to other inflationary or other times in the inflation that was a reality, only seeing 11.4% of the inflation being driven by corporate profits. So very major factor there that Republicans do not want to talk about, of course. And I just think it's important to circle back around to this rather often, because that talking point is going to be present very much so in the 2024 election and just daily in American politics. Republicans want to frame Democrats as the irresponsible spenders, bad for the economy. We know the economy does better over the last multiple decades under Democrats than it does Democratic presidents than it does under Republican presidents, and even in this specific time, them saying Democrats are the reason for these bad economic indicators is also not an honest talking point, and we shouldn't. The reason is not because, oh, we need to defend the Democratic Party. No, it's the facts. The facts matter. And the Democratic Party is much more likely to actually put forward policy that will improve the lives of Americans. And so we can't let Republicans use these talking points to attempt to prevent the Democratic Party from possibly putting forward those solutions, and the Democratic Party getting scared away from spending on some of these important programs. Because it's not the truth that the pain we're experiencing in terms of inflation is because of irresponsible Democratic spending. And that can be a tool, that talking point can be a tool used to prevent some very good things from happening. And that's why I want to circle back on that today. Let me know what you think, Luke P. Beasley on Twitter. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are uploaded to YouTube, plus get the extra bonus show on the weekend, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. Link in the description.